corrupted and reconfigured. Thus the widow asked for and insisted on justice. The silencers variously intended to maintain the status quo. In the ancient text, the paradigmatic silencer is above all Pharaoh, a metaphor for all silencers, a company that comes to include, in the biblical tradition, kings, priests, scribes, and the crowd that was uncritically allied with such powers. We know very well in our time, moreover, that many voices are required for the maintenance of a democracy, and so the silencers resort to voter repression and gerrymandering, strategies for silencing those who would disrupt present power arrangements. Thus, the ongoing historical process can be seen as an unequal contest between the silencers and those who would break the silence in the interest of new historical possibility. The contest is unequal because the silencers have better means of communication and control, not least management and ownership of most of the public media. In the world of the ancient text, public media meant especially the stylized practices of monarchy and temple. Breaking the silence is always counter-discourse that tends to arise from the margins of society, a counter to present power arrangements and to dominant modes of social imagination. To be sure, the breaking of silence is not always positive and constructive, as some silence breakers may also yield destructive voices. We should not romanticize. A case in point of such negative silence breaking is that of the far-right political leader in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders, who lost an election for prime minister in March 2017. At the instant of his electoral defeat, he declared, "Regardless of the verdict, no one will be able to silence me." Another example is flag burning in the United States. It is such unwelcome speech, but it is protected by the Constitution. Nevertheless, President Trump wants to silence such activists by jail or revocation of citizenship. That, of course, is the risk of allowing for silence breaking, but it is a risk that is indispensable for any human society that is not to drift further toward fascism and the domination of a single voice. The Church has a huge stake in breaking the silence, because the God of the Bible characteristically appears at the margins of established power arrangements, whether theological or socioeconomic and political. The Church at its most faithful is allied with artistic expression from the margin that voices alternatives to dominant imagination. Prayer, beyond conventional polite prayer, is an act of breaking the silence. Thus, in the parable of Luke chapter 18, verses 1-8, Jesus tells the disciples to pray like the widow in the narrative, that is, to pray always and not to lose heart. Verse 1. Intercession, that is, intrusion into the courts of power on behalf of another, is central to the Church's action in prayer. Gerald Shepherd has, moreover, proposed that the lament and protest prayers of the Book of Psalms that critique and assault enemies are designed for being overheard by those enemies, who are thereby called to account. We may argue that prayer, even when spoken in private, is a political activity. Prayer requires an economic use of times and places. Prayer seeks to articulate reality, attribute aspects of reality to God, summon God to act, and nurture courage to persevere or provoke change in the conduct of the one who prays. The question is, strictly speaking, not whether prayer is political, but what politics pertain to this or that particular prayer. The studies offered here are discrete discussions of specific texts. The effect for me, however, has been cumulative, and I hope it will be so for the listener. As I have moved from text to text, the company of silence breakers has become more evident to me. Since we now live in a society and a world that is fitfully drifting toward fascism, the breaking of silence is altogether urgent. In the institutional life of the Church, moreover, the breaking of silence by the testimony of the gospel often means breaking the silence among those